Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Dutif. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. Check out these screens behind me. These are feeds coming in to us from all of our stations and affiliates across the country. If there's news breaking out there, we're going to bring it to you right here. This is CBS Mornings. No, it's not. It's CBS News 24/7. Been on that show way too long. Let's begin. Wildfire is burning on both sides of the continental United States. We're going to take a look at the damage and the weather conditions fueling the dangerous conditions. President-elect Donald Trump is surging ahead, filling out his new administration. We'll tell you which familiar Republicans will and will not be part of the team. And it's a major day for the fight against climate change as global leaders gather for the annual COP29 Climate Summit today. It's in Azerbaijan. By the way, that's an oil producer. Okay, what's at stake and what role will the U.S. election play in those meetings? This is CBS News 24/7. With those wildfires raging in multiple states. Over out west in California, firefighters are making some progress with the so-called mountain fire, which is breaking out in Southern California. The fire in Ventura County has burned more than 20,000 acres and destroyed more than 100 homes. We spoke to an emotional homeowner grappling with the devastation. Listen.
It's hard to see this. It's harder, I think, today for me than it was even a few days ago to wrap my head around the gravity of what has happened to our home.
CBS News correspondent Elise Preston is live with the latest and joins me now. So, Elise, we just showed some of those images. Describe how bad the damage is thus far.
Yeah, those images are really tough to see, Vlad, but take a look at this house behind me. This is what you're seeing when you're just driving through the neighborhood. This is one home that has just been burned to the ground. There's just ashes. We actually saw this homeowner yesterday kind of pick up pieces. Things were barely recognizable. She picked up a few diamonds and some other pieces of jewelry, but for the most part, she lost everything, including her two cats. They were afraid during the fire as it was coming in, and they jumped out of their hands and ran off into their home. But this is one small street right here that has 19 homes. More than a dozen of the homes look like this. They've all burned to the ground. You mentioned 20,000 acres have been scorched all throughout this county. So it's a lot to bounce back for these people and the community as a whole.
How much further do crews have to go, and what are some of the challenges they're going to be facing today?
So the fire is about 30% contained, and it is still too dangerous for some people to come back into their homes. But the good news here is that the weather conditions have changed, so that it's a little more favorable for firefighters. The reason why this fire was so dangerous and that it moved so quickly because the conditions were very dry and the winds were so fast that they would just whip the flames about. So like while this home behind me is standing right across the street, this home behind me is burned down. The home right across the street is still standing. So what has happened is that the winds have died down and the humidity has risen. So that has helped firefighters. I was at a community meeting last night and the firefighters were discussing how tough those conditions were that they themselves, when they were driving around just trying to survey what was going on, they said that they got trapped multiple times in their own vehicles.
Wow. All right. Elise Preston for us this morning. Thank you, Elise. On the East Coast, a wildfire in New Jersey has turned deadly after an 18-year-old Parks employee was killed while helping firefighters. CBS News correspondent Tom Hansen is in Hewitt, New Jersey with the very latest.
Hey there, yeah, we're here in New Jersey where you can see, this is the scene behind me, smoldering hillsides where just about 24 hours ago, we wouldn't have been able to even stand here because this is on fire. Now, I want to give you an idea of just how strong these flames are. You can see this stump, which was clearly cut down before this fire, but this stump has been reduced to brittle. And that has people concerned because if this stump were a full standing tree, that means that it would probably be hollowed out and that tree would be prone to falling. Unfortunately, that is what we saw over the weekend. An 18-year-old who was helping battle the flames died after a falling tree fell on him. So that's something that officials are very concerned about. Those falling trees could also take down power lines, which could reignite this fire. Now, there has been a little bit of a reprieve, but this is how close things were to catastrophe for this homeowner. You can see just a stone's throw away, a residential property where the flames ended. Fortunately, one of the things that we saw overnight was some much needed rain. It wasn't nearly enough to take out the flames entirely, but it certainly did help. And you can see that crews are also seizing on the opportunity. While there is a little bit of a reprieve, there are trucks like this that we've been seeing filing in and out of the area, equipped with hoses. They're trying to get ahead of these flames before more dry conditions are expected to be seen over the weekend, accompanied by up to 20-mile-an-hour gusts. So we are seeing a little bit of a reprieve right now, but certainly we are nowhere near the finish of this fire, and that has officials standing on high alert. Back to you.
All right, Tom Hansen for us this morning. Thank you, Tom. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the first look at the national forecast. Grant, perhaps some rain relief in the cards for the East Coast or not?
Well, yeah, we did get some rain last night. It really started yesterday evening, where some places across the Northeast had gone over a month, Vlad, a month without any measurable rainfall. Here in Philadelphia, we went 42 days without any measurable rain. So all of that green that was on the radar yesterday, while it is moving out, it did offer at least some relief. And at this point, a little bit of rain is better than the no rain that many folks along the Northeast have seen going back to really late September. All right, so dry conditions now return to the Northeast. There's a chance of rain later in the week. Meanwhile, also breezy conditions concerning other wildfires in Southern California, where gusts tonight into the day tomorrow could increase up to 40 miles per hour, if not in some places approaching 60 miles per hour. This is on the tail end of a cold front that's actually associated with an atmospheric river bringing quite a bit of rainfall to Northern California, up into Oregon and Washington state. That's storm system number one. The second storm system will approach as we go through Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, bringing another round of rain. We'll have to watch that cold front to potentially increase the wind speeds once again as it moves through portions of Southern California, which would then increase the wind speeds, make it a little bit gusty out there. Meanwhile, actually above normal temperatures for a good portion of the Southeast, even though there are some showers, pleasant and dry weather across the northern tier into the Midwest. Vlad, back to you.
All right, Grant, thank you very much. We are learning more about what President-elect Donald Trump's cabinet will look like this morning. At least two major spots have already been filled, with the big one announced this morning. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang is live for us this morning in West Palm Beach. Weijia, good to see you. All right, so we can now confirm Trump's pick for both border czar and the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. What more can you tell us?
That's right, Vlad. For border czar, we know that Trump has chosen Tom Homan, who worked with him in the first administration as the acting director of ICE. And then for the ambassador to the United Nations, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York. And one thing that both of these people have in common, Vlad, is their loyalty to the president-elect over the years. They have been staunch Trumpers. They have been able to not only share the same view as Trump, but in both of these cases, be very vocal about it. If you look at clips, whether it's, on the House floor for the Congresswoman, whether it's testifying before the Senate for Tom Homan or during TV interviews, they are very able to speak the Trump language, meaning they are very brash, they are very to the point, and they don't try to dance around things that might be viewed as offensive, especially when it comes to the issue of immigration for Tom Homan. And so he really views this as a black and white issue, Vlad. Our colleague Cecilia Vega recently asked him in an interview whether there is any good way to deport a family, any humane way to do that. And he said, yeah, you deport the entire family. And so he views it as very black and white in the sense that either you are here legally or you are not. But he has also said, Vlad, that this isn't going to be a sweeping roundup of everybody who is here and undocumented. He says it will be very precise at first and going after people who are here illegally and also could be committing crimes. And, he says they have a list of people that they want to round up first, Vlad.
All right, and let me ask you about those other names that we're hearing that have been eliminated from serving in a Trump administration, including Nikki Haley, his former UN ambassador, and Mike Pompeo, who was both Secretary of State and CIA director during Trump's first term. I can see perhaps Haley, she ran against him for the Republican nomination, but in my mind, Pompeo has been sort of a loyal, a guy, a person who hasn't really said anything critical of Donald Trump recently. What's the deal there?
Not only recently, Vlad, but he's really been by Trump's side throughout, the time that he started serving as Secretary of State. And in fact, campaigned for Trump as recently as the day before the election. I was just talking to our White House producer, Sarah Cook, about why Pompeo, and we could not really figure out why he would be on Trump's list of people who would not join a second administration, except for perhaps he flirted with the idea of running for president himself at one point. Now, Nikki Haley's a different story. Obviously, she said very critical things of the president-elect when she herself was challenging him in the Republican primary. And even though she ultimately ended up endorsing him and said she would even campaign for him, he never took her up on that offer, Vlad. And we also know that Trump is somebody who holds grudges. And perhaps he has forgiven Haley, but he will never forget all of the things that she has said about him.
Yeah, the other thing we did that I was sort of thinking, and you would know better than I, but throughout the first administration, there were many, many articles about folks within the inner circle who were trying to temper the president's worst impulses. And oftentimes in front of the cameras, they were very loyal. They all said positive things. But when they were speaking to you and other members of the press, they would say, look, the president wanted to do one thing and we counseled against it. My speculation is that people like Pompeo were perhaps playing that role. And in this administration, he doesn't want any guardrails. You either toe the line or you're out. He doesn't want to hear any dissent from people, even if they may be publicly saying good things about him.
That is incredibly astute, Vlad, because you're absolutely right. There were people behind the scenes, and you can easily see how Pompeo likely challenged him in some matters when it came to diplomacy and when it came to building those relationships with allies that in some cases Trump did not really invest much into. And that is why his foreign policy was based on the idea of America first. But, we don't know what happened behind the scenes. We do know that Pompeo, unlike others, has not publicly stated those criticisms, which is probably why Trump didn't completely throw him under the bus.
All right. For us, always great to talk to you, my friend. Thank you. All right, the Trump transition team may already be gearing up for a takeover, but President Biden has plans of his own for these last few weeks. Let's bring in CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes, who's joining me now to talk about that. So, Nancy, as you know, the White House is making the case for things like aid to Ukraine. They want that aid to continue flowing beyond the end of Biden's term. But we do know that one of the individuals he's considering to be Secretary of State has been very vocal about not supplying Ukraine with that aid. So how does the president feel that he's going to be able to navigate these next couple of months?
Right. You're referring to Senator Hagerty, who was actually on Face the Nation yesterday, Vlad, and said that he has never supported any aid to Ukraine. He said it multiple times. And so that gives you a flavor of the people that Trump is elevating. And so that is something that the Biden administration is, of course, very concerned about because they feel very differently. In fact, Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, who also was on Face the Nation yesterday, said that Wednesday, when the president-elect comes here to the White House to meet with President Biden, that President Biden is going to make the case for continuing to provide aid to Ukraine. They realize that it's very unlikely that Trump is going to continue the policies of this administration when it comes particularly to foreign policy, but they're going to make their best case on Wednesday.
Except, Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong, perhaps Ukraine won't need that aid because didn't the president-elect on the campaign trail say that he would be able to end the war in Ukraine in like 24 hours?
Right. And so that 24 hours actually ended last week. He said it would actually happen even before he took office once he was elected. That obviously hasn't happened. And certainly, yes, if the war somehow were to come to an end after all these years, Ukraine might not need more aid for fighting the war, but certainly a lot of U.S. allies in Europe would argue that Ukraine will continue to need a lot of help with rebuilding, not just its infrastructure, but its energy sector. Really every sector has been decimated over the past several years as it fights for its own survival against Russia.
Nancy, I know the president is traveling later this week, but he has scheduled that invitation to President-elect Trump, which is going to happen on Wednesday. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, that'll be an unusual meeting, to say the least. This is something that is customary. President Obama did the same thing when President-elect Trump was elected back in 2016. Obviously, they don't see eye to eye on much. The White House has said that President Biden will also share his outlook on the Middle East conflict, and he'll try to probe where Donald Trump's head is on that issue as well. Because after all, while Trump has been victorious here, he doesn't take office for another 70 days or so. And so this is still a very fluid, tense situation in the Middle East that is going to be difficult for the Biden administration to handle, partly because now the Democratic Party is a lame duck. There's perhaps less reason for any leaders in the Middle East to listen to what the Biden administration is saying, but also because we now know that Donald Trump and his aides are starting to have conversations with those leaders in the Middle East, whether it is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu or leaders from other countries. And so that can make things very, very tricky. It's not unexpected. It's not unusual, but all the more reason that the White House would like to, if not get on the same page with the incoming Trump administration, because that's unlikely to happen, at least have sort of a frank discussion about how they can handle the situation over the next 70 days.
And finally, Nancy, switching gears, taking politics out of it, it is Veterans Day. What is the president doing to honor those who have served?
Well, he's going to be laying a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington. He'll also be speaking, delivering remarks around 11:15 Eastern Time. And by the way, he will be with the vice president and the second gentleman today. That'll be the first time that we see her in her official capacity as vice president since she was defeated last week. So that will be a fascinating moment to watch as well.
It certainly will. Nancy Cordes for us at the White House this morning. Nancy, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. One person, folks, is dead and more than a dozen injured after a shooting at Alabama's Tuskegee University. We've got the latest on the investigation and the details on the person who was arrested. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. The FBI is investigating a deadly school shooting on the Tuskegee University campus in Alabama. One person was killed and dozens more injured. A barrage of shots rang out on campus early Sunday morning, and the violence erupted while the historically black university was celebrating the end of its 100th homecoming week. One man seen leaving the campus with weapons is now facing charges. CBS News correspondent Jason Allen is joining me now from Alabama with the very latest. So Jason, what do we know about a motive or about this person who was arrested?
So the motive, Vlad, at this point is still unknown. Law enforcement has not gone into detail about that. As you mentioned, this was on campus. This happened at the end of a week-long celebration, and it was a celebration that had largely gone on without any problems. From talking to the sheriff, he said he had deputized as many as 50 extra people just to add security during the week, and told me he was here on campus until moments before the shooting started, and there were no problems. But one of the students that we talked to, one of the injured students, said that she actually saw people running toward her in her direction before she heard the shots rang out. So that indicates something happened that got everybody's attention before the actual shooting started. She was one of the 16 people who were shot. One person was killed, an 18-year-old who was not a student here. And you mentioned that man who was arrested. Alabama law enforcement said that happened. He's 25 years old. He was seen leaving the area. He was in possession of a handgun with what they described as a machine gun conversion device, something that turned that weapon into basically an automatic weapon that he was able to use here on campus.
Jason, have the police confirmed whether or not this suspect was a student?
They have not. Again, 25 years old, so he could have potentially been a student, but they haven't said that specifically yet. They have been asking Vlad for more people to upload videos, give them evidence of what happened. And we've seen some of those incredible videos already, but that indicates that they may still be looking for others. And when we talked to the sheriff, he indicated that his initial thoughts were that there would be possibly others involved. So this investigation continues this morning, even as the campus is closed. They aren't having any classes today, although they do have grief counselors here available for students.
All right, Jason Allen reporting for us from near Tuskegee Institute. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. All right, a Disney Cruise Line jumped into action off the coast of Bermuda yesterday. The crew on board the Disney Treasure helped rescue 4 sailors from a disabled catamaran. The new ship was on its way to Florida from the Netherlands for its maiden voyage when the Coast Guard reached for the assist. The rescued sailors were not hurt. The Disney Treasure will welcome its first passengers next month. No word if the Little Mermaid was involved. She rescues sailors. That's why. Little Mermaid. There you go. Coming up, an update on those fugitive monkeys wreaking havoc in South Carolina. Details next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following for you this morning. Residents across Colorado are digging out for more than 3 feet of snow. The storm that hit over the weekend was the biggest multi-day November snowstorm to hit Denver in decades. This video is from Trinidad, Colorado, where 37 inches of snow fell in just a matter of days. Forecasters say warmer weather is on the way this week, allowing for the snow to begin to clear. Jury deliberations resumed this morning in Indiana in the case of the man charged in the murders of 2 teenage girls. The jury met in a rare Saturday session but failed to reach a verdict. Prosecutors say Richard Allen confessed to killing the 2 friends in 2017 and leaving their bodies near a hiking path in the town of Delphi. The defense alleges Allen's confession was a result of him being kept in solitary confinement for months. And an update on a story we brought you last week. 25 fugitive monkeys have been captured after escaping from a research facility in South Carolina. Veterans say they recovered the monkeys, who are all in good health. You'll remember that 43 female animals escaped last Wednesday when an employee failed to fully secure a door. That means 18 primates are still on the loose. Check in with me in 50 years when I'm standing in front of a Statue of Liberty saying, you guys are too young to remember. Planet of the Apes, the original. All right. Lawmakers begin to return to Capitol Hill tomorrow for the first time since the election. The balance of power will shift in Congress in January, with Republicans taking control of the Senate. Some House races have not been fully called, and some ballots are still being counted. CBS News Congressional correspondent Nicole Killian is joining me now from the Hill with more. All right, Nicole, let's talk about the Senate Majority Leader. It's kind of interesting to see the dynamic at play right now. What are you hearing?
Yeah, well, this will be a changing of the guard. Obviously, as Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has been in leadership for many years now, but he made the decision earlier this year that he would step aside from leadership and serve out the remainder of his term, which means there has been a lot of jockeying over these last couple of months for that position, who will lead the Senate Republican Party. And of course, now that they will be in the majority next year, that means whoever wins this position would become Senate Majority Leader. So we know that there is stiff competition between Texas Senator John Cornyn, John Thune, who is the Republican whip currently, and also Florida Senator Rick Scott, who most notably has picked up support from a number of Trump allies, including Elon Musk. And I guess that's a big question that we are watching for ahead of the election this week, is whether or not the former president, now president-elect, will endorse a candidate in the race. He has done that before in other leadership contests here on Capitol Hill, but whether or not he goes so far as to kind of put his thumb on the scale, if you will, is kind of the big question moving forward.
Let me ask you about the House majority, which is still not settled yet, Nicole. Where are we as far as the count is concerned?
Well, obviously, things are starting to tighten up. We are still characterizing this race as lean Republican. There are still a number of outstanding House races that have yet to be called, and that's certainly what Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is hoping for and holding out hope, saying that, Democrats are not going to concede at this point in time, that, there are many races that are still outstanding that are too close to call. That being said, House Republicans really feel very confident in their posture. They do plan to move forward with leadership elections as soon as this week, but they believe with pretty strong confidence that they'll have the ability to retain the majority, I should say. The bottom line, though, is that whichever party ultimately wins, it's pretty clear that either side would have a very narrow majority, which is not unusual to what we have seen over the last couple of cycles here on Capitol Hill.
And let's talk about a current member of Congress, Nicole, Elise Stefanik. It's been reported that the president-elect has chosen her for UN ambassador. Why do you think that she was picked, and what does it mean for the leadership structure in the House if she accepts?
Well, we know Elise Stefanik has been a very strong ally of the president-elect for some time now, so much so she was even on his short list to potentially become vice president or the vice presidential nominee. But, she has spent a lot of time campaigning on the part of the president-elect. She has worked very closely with him. She certainly has gotten a lot of attention for her work here on Capitol Hill, probably most notably for those series of hearings that we saw with a number of college presidents on the issue of anti-Semitism. And we saw a number of college presidents from Harvard to UPenn resign in light of some of the tough questioning that she had for those college presidents. But she has also served as the head of the Republican conference here in the House. And that also is a big question going forward, now that she is moving on into the Trump administration, who might fill her position in leadership. And as you can imagine, Vlad, the jockeying for that position has already begun in earnest.
Indeed, it has. Nicole Killian reporting on the Hill for us. Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate it.
You bet.
All right. Israeli Prime Minister Isaac Herzog is set to meet with President Biden at the White House tomorrow. The meeting comes as the U.S. pushes Israel for ceasefires in both Gaza and in Lebanon. The United States is also pushing to get aid from Israel into the war-torn enclave. CBS News foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer has more from the Israel-Gaza border.
Behind me, you can see food aid in Israel ready to be driven into Gaza. There's wheat flour to make bread. We've got blankets, toilet paper, essentials. It's a cumbersome business because the trucks will have to drive through the heavily guarded border, unload, and then have Palestinian trucks pick it up, reload it, and distribute it further inside the Gaza Strip. Today, about 150 trucks are going to cross into Gaza through 4 crossings. Under pressure from the Americans, the amount of aid is slowly increasing from a low in October of about 30 trucks a day. We're up to 150. A new crossing is supposed to open, says Israel, although they haven't told us when. But that's still 200 trucks short of the American target of 300 trucks a day. And in a letter, the U.S. has warned that if Israel doesn't meet that aid target, it risks losing defense assistance. It will face a reduction in the amount of military aid coming in that allows it to continue to fight this war. Back to you.
All right, Liz, thanks very much. All right, it's not often you see protesters in the streets of Cuba, but that's exactly what happened this weekend after residents had to endure days of widespread power outages from Hurricane Rafael. Power was finally restored to most areas yesterday after the country's power grid collapsed. Law enforcement warned public disorder would not be tolerated as the cleanup continues. Turning back now to one of our top stories, crews in New Jersey continue to battle a wildfire that has already burned over 3,000 acres. CBS News New York reporter Christina Fan has more from West Milford, New Jersey.
The Jennings Creek fire is currently burning to the north of us, and firefighters have been using every tool and resource at their disposal to protect the 25 structures and homes threatened in this immediate area. That includes the use of water tankers, helicopters, and even leaf blowers to help create fire breaks. Overnight, crews proactively burned low-lying vegetation along East Shore Road to ensure that the flames do not jump the road. So far, the fire is 10% contained and has burned burned more than 3,000 acres. Over the weekend, first responders went door to door, alerting families that voluntary evacuations are in place and be prepared to leave at a moment's notice. This fire has also turned deadly. 18-year-old Daryl Vasquez, an employee for New York State Parks, was killed Saturday by a falling tree. Fire officials say this fire season has shattered records with 537 incidents reported so far. That's roughly 500 more compared to the same time period last year. Reporting from West Milford, New Jersey, Christina Fan, CBS News, New York.
Thanks, Christina. All right, the annual UN summit known as COP29 kicks off in Azerbaijan. The conference is where nearly 200 countries gather for 2 weeks to work on strategies to slow global warming. Of course, the presidential election in this country will have a big impact on the talks there going forward. CBS News national environmental correspondent David Schechter is here in Studio 55 with me. Good to see you.
Thanks
in New
for
York.
having me in the lair. I appreciate it.
It's very cool to have you here because normally you're on the road. So let's first, I was asking you this during the break. The first question people will have is, wait, isn't Azerbaijan like one of the major oil producers? And why so then would they decide to have something that is clearly about protecting the environment in a country that, for better or for worse, is polluting the environment?
Total disconnect. Like, why is it an oil-producing country? It's sort of just based on the UN rules about where these conferences are. And so this one had to be in Eastern Europe. But Vladimir Putin said it can't be in a NATO country. Right. So it ends up being in Azerbaijan, which is a country that's sort of friendly to Russia, friendly to NATO, sort of in the middle, but a huge oil-producing state, the second time in a row. Next year it will be, though, in Brazil, in the Amazon.
So that's important because that part of Brazil is really facing dire threats from the rise of global temperatures. So let's talk about how this election here in the United States may affect what happens not just with that COP29, but just with climate policy around the world.
Huge. I mean, we're at a tipping point for climate change, right? So we're about to finish what will be the warmest year on record. We have the nations of the world that have committed to making changes, reducing the carbon emissions, have not met their promises. Some have done a pretty good job, including the U.S. in the last few years, but really missing our targets. Then we got these wildfires that you were talking about. We got extreme fire, drought. We have all these issues that are funneled by climate change, and a president now incoming who says climate change is a hoax. You bring all that to Azerbaijan, where all the nations of the world are gathering, and they say, well, where is the leadership from the U.S.? Should we be listening to the Biden administration that's here and presenting new ideas about how this country can cut its emissions? Or is this all going to just get cut into 2025 when a new president comes in who's really dubious of all these things?
So, David, one question that I have is, we saw during the first Trump administration governors of states and even mayors of some big cities deciding themselves to work diligently on the issue of climate change. Is that what we might potentially see again, where perhaps on a national level, the United States isn't leading the world, but in a particular state or in a particular city where there is a mayor or a governor who's inclined to work with those
Totally right on that. I mean, so a lot of concern that U.S. vacating its position of leadership around the world. Yeah. But like in Washington State, they just passed a really important climate resolution. There's ones on other ballots around the country. And cities have really taken the lead in this country to come up with policies to make their cities more resilient, to reduce carbon emissions from cities, and think about the future. So cities and states in this country will continue to lead the way. There are so many things that are happening now in progress, money being spent on huge things like battery plants, or an electric grid across the country to charge all of our electric vehicles that really can't be stopped. They are moving forward. This economy is transitioning to a green economy. So there will be things that the President Trump-elect will say, we're not doing this anymore. I'm taking us out of the Paris Accord. We're going to make a lot of changes. But many things will continue on, like you say.
So is there a role for Elon Musk to play in all of this?
I think he will be one person that we'll be watching so closely, right? He has benefits directly from climate legislation. He cares a lot about climate change. There's a $7,500 credit for all electric vehicles in this country from the United States government for new purchasers. And he'd like to keep that in place. Now he's got the president's ear, who is called climate change a hoax. Right. What kind of conversations are they having? Will that change the president's approach on things? I think we need to watch that really closely, because it seems like it's at least in the realm of the possible that he's got his ear. What's he going to do about it?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all develops. And I'm also curious to see if the United States cedes that role, that lead role in climate change, what country takes the place. And you told me earlier.
I think it's China.
It's going to be China.
And China's economy, 40% of China's economy its GDP is green technology, green energy transition, vehicles. That's huge, 40% of their economy. If the United States retrenches and says, we're not going to provide subsidies for electric vehicles anymore and things like that, and we're not going to lead on the world stage, China would love to come into that space, I would think, and say, well, we'd love to sell our electric vehicles to the United States. Of course, tariffs then come in.
Sure.
Or our panels that we're making, our solar panels.
Right.
It's really not just a policy decision. It's really an economic decision. Like, this is happening. This transition is happening. Who's going to benefit?
Really fascinating. Great to have you here in New York.
Great
man.
to be here.
Thanks
I
for
love it
coming
in
by.
here.
Come back anytime. We'd love to have you. Appreciate it. David Schechter for us this morning. All right, let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with another look at the national forecast.
Hey, good morning, Vlad. Good morning to you guys at home. Another weekend. Now we're talking about a different weather story, this time over on the West Coast. Let's zoom out and let me show you here what this looks like, because a couple of storm systems that are going to be bringing atmospheric rivers to the Pacific Northwest. Let me put on the satellite here. This is the satellite loop over the last 12 hours. Now, what's interesting about these atmospheric rivers is they start from low pressure systems up in near Alaska, but the cold fronts trail all the way into the Pacific Ocean, and they just draw in all of this moisture that's resulting in the form of rain, but then also adding to the snowpack from the Cascades down into the Sierra Nevada mountain ranges. Now, I'm going to drop this map, and I want to show you how this is all coming together to bring several rounds of heavy rainfall to portions of the Pacific Northwest as we go through the first half of the week. Here's system number one. System number one is now hitting the Pacific Northwest, but then another low-pressure system with its associated cold front is tapping into more Pacific moisture that will bring more rainfall into the middle of the week. There's that atmospheric river. It's just a river of that water vapor in the atmosphere that once it runs up against the mountain ranges, it produces that, well, rain and, of course, snow as well. Watch here with the forecast model. There goes system number one. We see a little break as we go through Tuesday, but then it looks like we see that second system arrive as we go into the middle of the week, bringing another round of rain, but also some drier and breezier conditions to Southern California that may, in fact, fuel some of the wildfires. There's the forecast. Those higher elevations are going to get some feet of snow. Meanwhile, the lower elevations, especially right there on the coast, are going to pick up 2 to maybe even 4 inches of rain as we go through the first half of the week. We've got showers across the southeast down into Florida. Actually, very warm conditions down towards Miami with highs near 87, with pleasant and dry weather through a good portion of the central of the United States. Vlad, back over to you.
All right, Grant, thank you very much. Today, the nation honors the men and women who put their lives on the line on behalf of their country. Coming up, how this Veterans Day is being marked across the U.S. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. This morning, European leaders gathered to mark Armistice Day, commemorating the end of World War I. King Charles led Britain in remembering the country's war dead at London's Cenotaph War Memorial. Queen Camilla was unable to attend, but Princess Kate Middleton was able to watch. In France, President Emmanuel Macron hosted British Prime Minister Keir Starmer at the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. The battles of World War I played out mostly on French soil. This nation is marking Veterans Day today. We honor those serving, past and present, for their love of country and willingness to sacrifice for all Americans. Some advocates say the day is also a reminder of the help our heroes are still in need of today. President and founder of the National Veterans Foundation, Shad Mashad, told us veterans need more resources for mental health challenges to combat homelessness.
Over the last half century plus, veterans have been last on the priority for all the administrations that we've served under. And one of the biggest issues is the VA. It's such a large bureaucracy. It's the second largest bureaucracy in the country. And as I've said for many years, it's not user-friendly. My career started inside the VA. We're over in the 70s. I was able to set a model that eventually became the Vet Center program, the readjustment program for Vietnam vets initially, and now since we've been through many wars since that, for all veterans. But it's really never enough. When you have over 22 suicides a day with veterans, and you have thousands of veterans that are homeless, doesn't that tell you something that we really need to do outreach? We need to get out where the veterans are, not just sit here, as many people do, and say, "Oh, come see us." Veterans are very proud. They've served their country. They have scars, both physically and mentally. Many of them do. And it's very tough for these warfighters to just walk in and say, "Hey, help."
The National Veterans Foundation offers mental health support for veterans through their Lifeline for Vets program. Those in need can call 888-777-4433. Or if they are in a crisis, or if you are in a crisis, you can call or text 988. Still ahead, we remember a dance legend, a look back at the life of Judith Jamison. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. On this Veterans Day, we're also shining a spotlight on some of those who have lost their loved ones in combat and how they're using their grief to help others. CBS News reporter Danya Bacchus has the story.
He was the person who saw me in ways nobody else did, and I think that's the power of love.
When Lisa Hallett's husband, Captain John Hallett, was killed by an IED in Afghanistan in 2009, she leaned on the thing that kept her going during her years as a military spouse.
Running was always a way for me to parallel the challenges John's faced in military service with a challenge of my own.
At the time of his death, Lisa and John had 3 children under the age of 3. Their youngest never met John. She was just weeks old.
I could go and run and feel all of the big feelings that I needed to, and then come home and be that mom that my children needed and deserved for me to be.
Running in community supported Lisa as she navigated and worked through her grief and loss. To help others, Lisa and a fellow Army wife started Wear Blue Run to Remember in 2010. Nearly 15 years later, through community runs and mentorship, the organization has helped thousands across the country heal from the devastating loss of a military loved one.
It really is about bringing like-minded individuals so that they can connect over their shared experiences, their shared losses.
This year, to remember John and raise money for families of fallen soldiers, Lisa ran the 150K long Wonderland Trail around Mount Rainier. Hallett, who lives in Washington State, says it was a natural choice to honor John.
Here's this beautiful precipice in our backyard that really encompasses all the things I wanted John to know: beauty, hard work, achievement.
She says doing hard things has allowed her to confront her grief and take the steps to move forward. Now she and others run for the fallen, the fighting, and their families. Danya Bacchus, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Trailblazing dancer and choreographer Judith Jamison has died at the age of 81. She broke barriers in the world of dance at a time when it was rare for Black dancers to be in ballet. She served as the artistic director of the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater for 2 decades, and she's credited for making it one of the most successful dance companies in the country. A spokesperson for the theater said in a quote, "We remember and are grateful for her artistry, humanity, and incredible light, which inspired us all." All right, let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the last look at the national forecast. Grant.
All right, keeping an eye on the West Coast, really specifically the Pacific Northwest, for a couple of rounds of some pretty strong storms that will be bringing some beneficial rainfall. Now, this first cold front is going to also dip into Southern California, which will increase the winds late tonight into the day tomorrow, which could fuel some of those wildfires. But you've got a lot of rain, even some mountain snow that'll be coming in a couple of rounds. There's storm system number 1 that will move inland, and then you have storm system number 2. Both of these coming with an atmospheric river that will bring a lot of that Pacific moisture right onto the West Coast and then up into the mountain range from the Cascades down into the Sierra Nevadas. Now, this second storm system probably a little stronger and will drop a little farther south, even some trailing showers and some snow continuing into the second half of the week. Meanwhile, very pleasant weather across the southern plains into Texas, back into the desert southwest. High temperatures in Phoenix today around 83 degrees. Pleasant and seasonably cool weather across the Midwest and into the northern tier, the southeast, very warm. Places like Miami near 87 degrees, but showers expected all up into the mid-Atlantic and then farther north and east. Some relief from the dry conditions in places like Philly and New York. Got some rain last night, but more rain on the way potentially as we go into the second half of the week. Meanwhile, finally, seasonably cool in the northeast as well. Vlad, back to you for now. We'll see you tomorrow.
All right, Grant, thank you. See you tomorrow. That does it for me. Stay right where you are. Elizabeth Cook is live from San Francisco with all the breaking news coast to coast after the break. This is CBS News 24/7.